government to be self-sufficient and user pays, which means that they get their money from the pesticide manufacturers. The problem with this is that this money is not sufficient to monitor the use of pesticides in New Zealand. It is not sufficient to cover the possible pollution of the environment and the adverse effects on people's health.
The World Health Organization has admitted that 20,000 people a year die from pesticide poisoning. That something like 2 million people a year are poisoned by pesticides worldwide. This is probably a tremendous understatement.
We don't know how many New Zealanders are poisoned by agricultural chemicals because no official records are kept. We only know about individuals who speak out, like Max Levitt, who sprayed pesticides on a Northland orchard over a period of 5 years.
I knew nothing about spraying. The rep from Australia, whose machine it was, told me all about it, and anyway, away I went. For a few years, towards the end there, my right eyelid was twitching almost constantly, and a muscle deep in my right arm was twitching. But I wasn't really aware of what that was. After 5 years, 10 days after spraying, the chemical was emitted from pores in my hands and my feet and absolutely stank. No matter how much washing I did, it just kept coming out. And that was when I approached my employer and asked him to smell my hands and say, look, the chemical is in me, it's coming out of me, I've had enough, find someone else to do it.
Max Levitt is no longer spraying pesticides. His old job is done by somebody else. After 18 months, the muscle spasms have stopped, but he is still concerned about his future.
Yeah, I often wonder, any health problems I have in the future, what are they going to be attributed to that 5 years of contact with organophosphates?
It's impossible to use human guinea pigs for testing these things, so it's usually an epidemiological study or a retrospective study of some sort. So it's very difficult to get the exact information. Most of the information that we use is generated from animal trials, and then we extrapolate to humans.
Our vulnerability to different pesticides or different chemicals can vary by a factor of 100. I may be 100 times more vulnerable than you are. A child is very much more vulnerable than an adult, and a fetus even more so.
It is impossible to say that a spray is safe among human populations, and we've had examples where chemicals have been perfectly safe with animals, and thalidomide was a good example, and yet with humans, with women, in a certain aspect of their pregnancy, then the child was affected. So those sort of things can slip through with animals. And therefore, really, no spray can be said that it's totally safe with humans, like a whole range of them being said to be safe and then gradually found not to be so and withdrawn, until the spray has been used for a time.
This helicopter is spraying an organophosphate, one of a family of chemicals used for years in New Zealand on fruit, vegetables and animals. Recently, organophosphates have been linked to brain damage amongst British farmers.
Yes, we've been following it very closely because organophosphates are very important chemicals, both as pesticides and particularly as parasiticides for dipping sheep. And the majority of the debate in Britain has been about sheep dips. And there was a threat for some time that these products might be banned in Britain, in which case we would then be in a situation of having to have a look at what we do here. However, at the moment, the British position is that there's no evidence that these products are causing a problem, but that is not the end of the situation. They're going to carry on investigating. So we'll be watching that with great interest.
By simply debating the merits or dangers of one chemical after another, do we ignore a more significant issue? All over the world, there is increasing unease about agricultural chemicals. But can we grow all the food we need without them?
One insecticide it gets down its throat these days, it's 3. And what's even more diabolical, the drug companies say, well, it's at least 10 years down the line before we can give you any more insecticides because most of them are so toxic to humans and they last so long in the animal.
These sheep are growing up fit and healthy on a 1,000-hectare organic farm west of Auckland. John Pearce has been farming successfully for 16 years without chemicals on his crops or in his animals.
This is 6 or 7 generations now that we have not been dipping or drenching, and they survive at a very high rate. We had 6 deaths between lambing and weaning last year. That's 6 out of some 590 lambs. Very, very good statistics.
Initially, MAF, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, was sceptical about the possibility of farming animals successfully without chemicals. But John Pearce has clearly demonstrated it can be done.
The flies don't attack our sheep, and that's another amazing thing that happens once you get off the chemical bandwagon. And as we see it, a fly only wants to lay its egg on something that's going to die, because that's the host for its babies when they hatch out. And as much as, you know, we had to go to quite some lengths to get permission not to dip, when we had gone 2 years with no dipping and MAF had been monitoring us, they then said, well, you haven't got any flies because the fish fertilizer you make is swallowing them all up. So the DSIR came out and counted flies for 3 years, and we have exactly the same number of flies as any other people that are farming close to a beach. So, you know, there has to be some information there that has been lost, and that is, if you eat properly, then the flies aren't going to lay their eggs on you.
John Pearce is constantly developing new activities to expand his range of organic products. Cultivating sugarcane is one such new development. Together with his fruit trees and berry gardens, the cane fields will help to maximise the return from his dairy herd. Flavoured yoghurt and ice cream will be produced here on the farm for the growing organic market. A welcome outcome from such diversity is the number of people that may be profitably employed, from a minimum of 6 to a peak of 36 in the busy times. John Pearce uses only natural fertilizers that are prepared on the farm. An independent American study has established that the depth of fertile soil here is actually increasing, in marked contrast to other farms in the area. Weeds are also controlled using a remarkable traditional method.
That's a technique that the Maori people were using. The old Europeans used it, something that Rudolf Steiner, the guy who invented kindergartens, came up with about 70, 80 years ago, and that is you burn the seed. And you burn the ripe seed, and then you dilute it in water or in ash or in lime or whatever you're putting on your property, and somehow that interferes with the whole fertility process. And as you can see, you know, the thistles don't come up again.
Hohepa Homes in Napier owes much to the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, who proposed a powerful connection between healthy soil, healthy food, and healthy humans.
Hohepa Homes was started in the late 1950s as a home for children with intellectual disabilities. And from that time, it's grown to a rather large organisation which caters for 65, 70 adults with varying disabilities who live and work here in the homes.
The entire range of food needed to sustain this community is all grown right here on the farm. One of the fundamental principles of the Steiner system is that everything is cyclic. All waste material is either composted or fed out to the animals. They in turn provide meat and manure. Healthy crops and stock are achieved through careful rotation.
The cows themselves are rotated through the fields on a very rigorous way, in order that they themselves don't suffer from intestinal diseases as best you can. And the vegetables themselves are rotated using various principles, but fundamentally what you're trying to achieve is that the same families of plants are not in the same place more than they can cope with. You take some crops like cabbages or cauliflowers, for instance, they really can't go back on that land for 4 or 5 years, and other crops are more tolerant.
The cycle is completed by the flourishing hives of bees who provide honey as well as pollinating the crops and the extensive home gardens. Bees are amongst the first victims of pesticides, and farmers often need to bring them in when they want their crops fertilised. Here, they're just part of the natural scheme of things, living and working on the farm. These days, chemical sprays are used extensively on vineyards. Over 80% of wines tested recently in a Ministry of Health survey contained pesticide residues. Here in Gisborne, however, award-winning wines are consistently turned out by the Milton vineyard without the use of any pesticides.
The wine from the Milton vineyard has to sit on a shop shelf against everyone else's wines and be, if not better or as good quality as everyone else's. That is firstly the most important thing, and secondly it's a bonus to the consumer that this wine is organic.
As part of the organic system, the vines are protected from pests by predators, such as the praying mantis and the ladybird. The predators are attracted by flowering plants, like this Phacelia, planted throughout the vineyard. Here too, compost plays a vital role.
We have all sorts of things that go in compost. We have our green matter, all our cuttings, as you can see, quite a few of them from the vineyard from our winter prunings. All our winery waste, everything is actually put into our compost. So you've actually got a wonderful selection of all the resources that we use, and we've finished with waste. They all go into the compost and then we put them back into the vineyard. And it's wonderful. You can see green matter. There's the pruning cuttings. So it's a wonderful, wonderful array of everything.
The entire Milton property is organically managed as one big garden. There is no conflict between commercial and personal values.
The health of the soil and the plant is the most important thing. And if that thrives and grows well, and their resistance is built up, it's a wee bit like ourselves. If we're fairly sickly and don't do very well and are always sick, life becomes fairly heavy. Whereas once the grapes are, once you've got this wonderful health amongst them all and their resistance is built up, it becomes a very, quite an easy way of maintaining what you're growing.
Building health in soil in order to produce strong plants is not a mystery. It's common sense familiar to all good gardeners.
Prior to buying the land, we had our own home garden, rather large. We grew all our own vegetables. We had our compost. We never sprayed. When we started growing commercially, we just expanded on the home garden production system.
Tony Mallard has a 20-acre block on the outskirts of Christchurch. He produces a full range of organic vegetables, which he sells entirely through his farm shop.
I think there's a feeling that some of the conventional, normal vegetables, such as cabbages and cauliflowers, aren't really the type of crops that organic growers grow. But the truth of the matter is, we find you grow what people normally eat. You don't try to dictate to your customer what they should be eating or buying. But we don't sell produce that's got bug holes in it. We don't sell produce that's got aphids in it or slugs in it or whatever. And that's not a problem to us. It's very, very rare for us to find infestations of anything in the crops.
According to Tony Mallard, when he purchased this land, it was hard and unyielding after years of chemical farming. A massive composting program has now transformed it to the point where it delivers an abundance of food.
Just there's adequate moisture there most of the season without irrigation. It's very friable, it's very aerated. The soil microbial activity is quite immense. There are a lot of things that you can't see. You can see earthworms, but you can't see the microbes. But it appears that they work in our favour immensely in making nutrients readily available. I think fundamentally we consider the soil comes first. Everything we do is done for the soil, whereas conventionally practically everything's done for the crop.
It may look primitive, but this simple piece of technology does get rid of the weeds. In fact, organic farming often looks to the past to find simple solutions. Most market gardeners would use a herbicide on these carrots to achieve the same result.
The wheel and the frame belong to my wife's grandmother, and the blade or the hoe here was imported from America by my grandfather. So it's ancient, but we find for narrow row work, it's still got a very real place. What we've done in the past is looking after us in the future. The compost that we put on 10 and 15 years ago is still working for us. And what we put on now hopefully will be working for us in another 15 or 20 years' time.
It's hard to see a downside to organic farming. Why then is it not happening everywhere? In Auckland is throwing a party. The enthusiastic turnout reflects a growing interest in healthier lifestyles. Marketing strategists see this worldwide trend as a crucial challenge and a real opportunity for New Zealand products.
All of these things are part of the overall image which we want to try and project. I mean, we've got some key industries upon which our country's going to depend for a long time to come. They're things like tourism, food and beverage, forestry, our fishing industry. All of those industries really need to position themselves at the very top of the market segments they're in. And part of that positioning is going to be all about safe, environmental, sustainable practices. And that's why I think there's a big spin-off. This is just a part of the process. But every one of those sectors has to ensure they don't let the rest of the side down.
Unfortunately, achieving sustainability is not always that easy.
We would like to change this shop so that 50–60% of what you see would be food rather than necessarily supplements. But we can't get the supply of food continuously that we need. We don't have a source of organically grown bananas, and we're looking at trying to source those at the moment. And there's not that consistency there, so that we'll get supplies for a limited period of time, then we'll run out. And customers don't like that. They want to be able to come in and shop here and know they can get their basic food and fruit and vegetables here consistently year-round. And at the moment, unfortunately, we can't offer that to them.
Supply shortages invariably mean higher prices. So why aren't more farmers getting into it?
Often it starts as a technical issue, you know, be it weed control, or how do we maintain our soil fertility, or how do we keep our animal health going, and how do we control diseases. And often it's really a matter of just working through those issues with the farmer, and there are answers for most of those issues. And then we get down to the real hard part, which is the attitude, often farmers, for some reason, don't want to be seen to be too green, and they get a little bit scared by the perception sometimes of being called organic.
It used to be MAF who encouraged and even required farmers to use agricultural chemicals. Today they lack the resources to reverse the process, even if they want to.
We are a much smaller organisation than we once were, that's for sure. And as such, our role has actually changed. Our role is now to develop policies and carry out research into things such as dairy shed effluent, soil erosion, rural tourism, and that sort of thing, and provide that information to the end users. But we are no longer the hands-on farm advisors we used to be, that's true. But there are other people out there doing that job.
In organics, there's no recipe, and it's really a matter of trying to tailor the management to meet each individual farmer's situation. And that's a pretty complex job, and it requires the introduction of a lot of new management strategies, and that's a pretty steep curve.
In the past, farmers were given a great deal of government assistance to farm with chemicals. Now the days of subsidies are over, so those who want to change to organics or to market organic products are pretty much on their own.
When we say we want to export a particular product, we don't get any assistance of any sort to actually even find a market for what we've got. Wool in particular is a prime example. The Wool Board knows they need organic wool, but they won't do anything about even assisting us to market it.
Little attempt is being made to find out what organic producers need. In many cases, even a minor effort would make a fundamental difference.
Really just acknowledgement that when one works within a trademark, which you're working within a set of standards, and looking at export to a fairly closed market, for example, like the EEC, where you are having to register that product as a certified organic product, that if there is a government stamp of approval beside it, for the large supermarket chains such as Safeway, it would make a huge difference.
Some problems are not so easily solved, like the intrusion of other people's chemicals. Organic growers are vulnerable to spray drift, which can affect both health and the most carefully laid plans. Jim Ray took over his family's avocado orchard after completing his degree in horticultural science. This beautiful frost-free property in Northland seemed an ideal place to develop and implement his knowledge of organic farming. His dream was to build a productive, sustainable ecosystem. Unfortunately, this was not to be.
It was perhaps 6, 7 o'clock at night. I'd just finished work for the day. And I came inside here and I began to smell something. And it's a very distinctive smell to the nose. And I looked up in the paddock there behind us, and there was a huge cloud of, well, it looked like a fog bank, like mist. It filled the entire paddock. The smell was getting very much stronger by the minute. Over a period of several hours, it rolled down the hill onto our property and sat here. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here. The smell was too strong. It burnt my nose and my throat, and you could feel it on your skin and taste it on your lips. And every instinct told you just to get out. It was very much stronger when I returned. On my pots, on my fruit bowl, it touches everything.
In the morning, Jim Ray collected samples to send away for analysis to find out exactly what had drifted onto his property. His samples, when tested, showed the presence of chlorpyrifos, an organophosphate insecticide commonly used in avocado orchards. This incident in March 1993 involved spray from a tractor-mounted unit. On other occasions, Jim Ray has complained of drifting organophosphate following helicopter spraying.
As far as organophosphates are concerned, there's not very much aerial spraying of that takes place, but they are used widely in the orchard system with the air blast sprayers, which of course throw it up into the air. In most instances, of course, most orchards have shelter belts to prevent some off-target drift, but there is still a need to watch what you're doing.
These shelter belts clearly did not offer total protection from the organophosphates sprayed by this helicopter. Jim Ray was able to video the spraying on this occasion. The neighbouring farmer responsible for the spraying declined to talk about it on camera. He did provide a written statement in which he said, "We, along with other avocado growers in the area, spray with organophosphates and other chemicals because of the avocado industry's quarantine export spray program." The issue is as much one of emotional differences of philosophic outlook as anything else. Good shelter belts such as ours and the use of buffer zones assist in preventing drift. We adhere strictly to the GrowSafe Code of Practice for spraying and take every precaution in terms of weather conditions and application procedures. We can only applaud the ultimate ideal that New Zealand should as a nation embrace the organic vision and abandon the use of chemicals. Meanwhile, as with all areas of farming and horticulture, use of chemical sprays is a commercial necessity and a part of modern productive life.
We basically tried everyone we could, everyone who could remotely be considered responsible. We wrote to the District Council, the Regional Council, the Health Department, MAF, the Labour Department, the Department of Internal Affairs. And we were met with a barrage of replies that basically passed the buck. Civil Aviation said it was MAF, MAF said it was the Health Department said it was the Regional Council, District Council said it was the Health Department and the Regional Council. No one wanted to accept responsibility.
The Northern Regional Council did investigate the incident and reported that there is no doubt that spray drift occurred.
The pesticides concerned in this Taha incident are pesticides which are authorised under the Pesticides Act and its associated regulations and authorised for helicopter spraying on avocados. So basically the Regional Council has to presume that that those who are responsible for these registrations and that the Ministry of Health and the National Health Authorities consider those chemicals to be safe for those uses.
Well, the evidence that we have would suggest people might have a short-term acute response, and some people are more sensitive than others, and people's perception of risk sometimes makes them have a greater reaction than others. The evidence that we have at this stage would suggest that it's a very minor problem.
Following the event, I became very sick, to the point where I was really bedridden. I had no energy, very lethargic. I didn't have the energy to lift my toothbrush. And yet, the day before the event, I was charging around. I could do a full day's work.
We have had council staff go there for quite long periods during spray days, from early in the morning until quite late in the evening. You know, they haven't observed any problems on the days they've been there. I mean, it's a pretty difficult thing to monitor.
The Northern Regional Council's report stated, as yet, there is no verifiable physical medical evidence of adverse health effects. The neighbouring farmer says that he has now begun to use softer sprays, which are not organophosphates, but he declined a request for specific details regarding this. He denies that the spray drift occurred at all. Yet it was specifically as a result of spray drift on his property that Jim Ray failed to meet the rigorous standards demanded of organic growers. He lost his organic certification and with it a large part of his income. Jim Ray no longer lives on his property. He has leased it to another farmer.
It feels at times as though I've been to the end of the earth in trying to deal with this matter, find out who is responsible.
And will become an organic nation when we recognise that as well as making sense in terms of the environment and our health, it makes economic sense too.
1988 was our crucial year. We were packing fruit for export one year, and we just decided to do some figures on the costing of what the fruit was worth on our packed truck. By the time we'd worked out our labour cost, our spray costs and our time and all other expenditure, we were landing up with around about $1 a carton. So that truckload of apples was worth about $200 to us, which was really not economically sustainable.
With little to lose, John Glucina went organic. Waiting in his West Auckland orchard, however, was a small but devastating pest, the codling moth. Unchecked by pesticides, the moth population exploded. Larvae would have devoured the crop had not horticultural scientist John Clearwater been ready to test a revolutionary technique to control the moth. He tied plastic tubes filled with moth sex attractant to the trees.
This tube is the equivalent of about 10,000 females. So a male is going to be attracted primarily to this type of tube. The female that might be calling, say you can see a tube on this tree here, if there's a female sitting up here and putting out a very small amount of the same sort of sex pheromone, the males just aren't going to find her. They're not going to detect her when there's this massive amount being produced by the pheromone dispenser.
Disoriented and alone, the male moth flutters about until exhausted he dies, never having met his mate. There are no new larvae to continue the cycle. the crop is safe.
Well, the biggest benefit that I see is that a whole variety of other pests that will normally require a pesticide treatment can now be left largely to the activities of the natural predators. So you have basically in an organic orchard a living ecosystem with all of the parasitoids, the little wasps, the little parasites, all busily engaged in keeping the population of their target pests down at a very low level.
Today, John Glucina's orchard costs no more to run than when it was chemically managed, but it delivers much greater returns. He has developed a range of organic products. His bottling plant is kept busy supplying a thirsty market for organic juices.
If the codling moth had have wiped us out, I wouldn't be here in this industry now. But we've got it under control, doing quite well, and so we're here to stay.
The most important thing now is to commercialise it, to extend it to other growers. We've got a number of people that have expressed their interest in taking on the organic program, and I see a great future for that. We've proven the system, it works, and it works well. We now need to get a substantial body of people growing, producing a substantial amount of fruit, so that we can at last begin to supply some of the many demands for organic product. I get a regular beating on my door from people from overseas who want organic fresh fruit, they want organic produce, they want organic juice, they want organic baby food. I've got a number of growers who've expressed their interest. Now I want to put those together, and I really think there's good money there for the country and for the growers, and that's our next step.
I think organics have come a long way themselves. I mean, they've gone from being a cottage industry producing products which were singularly unattractive to the consumer when put alongside products from other systems, to now being products which compare very favourably. And I think a lot of the bigger companies are realising that it can be done, and they're devoting increasing resources to organic production as a part of their whole portfolio of interests.
When Noel RAIHANIA took over the management of the Skisbin farm, it was derelict. He needed a partner with sufficient resources to help bring the land back into production. At the same time, Wattie Frozen Foods were looking for growers with whom they could expand their export program for organic vegetables.
We started with customers in Japan and the US, and so far we've been unable to meet their demands.
So when they heard about this property, they shot around and had a look, and they said, this would do us if you agree to go bio-grow. And I said, yep, we'll help you all the way.
Together, they decided to grow organic corn, a product Watties were keen to establish.
Our first year, we got swamped with blinking rain. It wasn't very, very successful, but we made enough out of the crop, just enough to give it another go. Second year it came out not too bad. We reduced our area of crops because that's all the money we had left to plant, I think 40 hectares it was we planted. And we didn't get a bad return, so we planted more, 60-odd hectares last year, and we got a very good return. And this year we've extended our planting area again to about 70 hectares.
The venture is a commercial success. Watties now want other food processors to enter the organic market to increase the viability of large-scale organic growing.
We'd like to see other companies come in with products that are suitable for crop rotations with the kinds of products that we grow. Organic bread would be a good example, so we'd see organic cereals in a crop rotation.
In fact, product diversity is essential to the growth of the overall market, a process that will only really be driven by demand. There are encouraging signs of such demand, both here and overseas. And with good returns for most organic food crops, many production problems are being solved, like the onion conundrum. Bob Crowder has been toiling for years at the Biological Husbandry Unit, which he founded at Lincoln University. With minimal funding, he has developed numerous techniques for organic agriculture. The high price being paid for organic onions and the difficulty of growing them commercially without pesticides was an irresistible challenge for him.
It was only because we developed the thermal weeder, which is a flame weeder, that we even contemplate direct sowing onions now.
At $50 per hectare, the thermal weeder costs slightly less to run than applying chemicals for weed control.
We now make an effort to prepare our seed bed nice and early. That gives rise to a nice early flush of weeds. We can then sow the onion seed, and then just before the onion plant comes through the ground, we go across and we burn off all those emerged weeds. And this gives a really good start to the onion crop, which is absolutely essential. But at the moment, the onion crop is by far our best value crop. It will gross for us something between $60,000 and $80,000 a hectare.
Organic agriculture is not a magic cure. It requires intelligence and real commitment. The concept of a completely organic nation is certainly a challenge to our imagination. But if you consider all the health, environmental and economic implications of maintaining our dependence on agricultural chemicals, then organic farming is the logical choice. Our unique international reputation for being clean and green is more than just an opportunity. It is more than a responsibility. It's our future.
When you think of the amount of money that has been spent on conventional research and what we've achieved here with no research money, and if you can imagine putting even a minute proportion of that research money into these kind of systems, then I think we would solve a lot of the problems of how to grow without chemicals.
I'm absolutely convinced that we could manage the entire country organically. It's a very achievable goal, and it would be an economically very worthwhile one as well. One of the things that is so exciting about the apple organic program is that to grow apples organically is just about the toughest proposition that you could have. And the fact that we're succeeding in growing apples organically says effectively that everything else can be done as well.
So we've got an awful lot of advantages and a lot that we can tap into, but basically we're back to basics. We're back to the way things have been done for centuries.